It was weird. He wasn't responding to anything.
We were told there's pretty much nothing we could do. The damage had been done.
The doctor said, I've never seen anything like this.
Her eyes went up in her head. She was shaking, foaming at the mouth.
That was the last thing I remember.
Next, two medical mysteries that defy the experts. 5-month-old Carson Colt seems like a healthy baby in every way, until his parents experience what can only be described as the shock of their lives.
I couldn't believe it. Horrifying is a perfect word.
It was probably one of the scariest things I ever saw, and his tongue was just bleeding and bleeding.
Then, Martha Bryce's perfect life is turned upside down when bizarre seizures threaten to take it all away.
I was lying on my back, and I had no idea why I was on the ground.
The episodes started to get longer, deeper. We had no idea what was happening.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery. In the fall of 1988, Jeff Colt was a college freshman in Walla Walla, Washington, when he stepped into a local campus hangout and experienced what can only be described as love at first sight.
I saw a beautiful woman and figured I'd try and get a date.
Her name was Dina Hernandez, also a freshman, and she was just as smitten.
He had these big blue eyes, you know, blonde hair, and he had this cowboy hat on, and it was those eyes that I fell in love with at first.
Jeff and Dina date for the next 4 years, and by the time graduation rolls around, they know they're ready to spend the rest of their lives together.
About a year after we got out of college, we got married.
It was a small wedding, just friends and family. It was just a very nice little ceremony.
Soon after, the young couple moves to Seattle. Dina lands a job as a fitness instructor, and Jeff works as a security guard while studying for his master's in education. But both are eager to start a family.
We started having thoughts about having children when, I was about 30 years old. I thought it would happen right away, and it didn't. A year went by, and I still wasn't pregnant.
Dina and Jeff are disappointed, but hoping for the best, they forge ahead and buy a new house with room for 3. Then, just a few months after moving in, they get the news they've been waiting for.
When I found out I was pregnant, it was very exciting. It was kind of scary because I was like, oh, okay, I am pregnant, so what's going to happen now?
Dina sails through the pregnancy, and on August 22nd, 2003, she goes into labor.
It was about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning.
She's like, my water's breaking, we need to go. So we rushed down to the hospital. I can remember her grabbing my hand and digging her nails in. I made a comment like, hey, that kind of hurts. And she's like, you don't even know what hurts.
At 11:30 that night, after 20 hours of labor, their son enters the world.
When he finally came out, I was just relieved. Jeff started crying, and I started crying.
We named him Carson just because I wanted kind of a rugged name.
The baby weighs a healthy 8 pounds 3 ounces, and in the eyes of his thrilled parents, he seems perfect.
He was just a calm, happy little dude. They handed him to Mom and snuggled up, never cried, and I was like, sweet, we got a content little baby here,
2 days later, on a hot August evening, Jeff and Dina bring Carson home. But within just a few hours, their healthy baby seems to take a turn for the worse.
He was really fussy and he looked red in the face.
So I took his temperature, and it was about 101.
He was definitely running a fever, and we weren't sure if it's because of the temperature of the house, and we had him wrapped up.
And so I called Dr. Christopher's office, and they said to check his temperature all night. They did say it's a little warm outside, so kind of keep him, bundled, but take off some blankets and see if that's okay. He cooled down a little bit that night. He was probably about 99 before he went down.
But in the morning, Dina and Jeff are faced with a frightening new development.
I checked his temperature again, and he was about 102. And so I called the hospital. They said, you need to bring him back in.
I was scared. First thing you start thinking is, did the baby get sick on the way home? Did we do something wrong?
We were very scared.
We rushed down to the hospital, which was about a 15-minute ride.
The Colt's pediatrician, Dr. David Christopher, meets them at the emergency room and wastes no time admitting Carson to the hospital.
A baby with a fever, we worry very much about infection, and it definitely could be a life-threatening situation for the baby.
They were concerned that his temp had spiked so much, and they put him in a special care nursery.
They wanted to rule out that Carson had any kind of infections.
We got a blood culture, and we also included a spinal tap to look for evidence of meningitis.
But while the hospital runs a battery of tests, a puzzling new pattern begins to emerge. Although the doctor is able to bring Carson's temperature down to 99 degrees, it doesn't stay down for long.
His body temperature fluctuated. He would overheat, so they would take everything off, and then he would get really cold. So his temperature would be about 97, and so then they would bundle him up again, and he would get a fever again.
24 hours later, the test results are in. But despite Carson's dramatic temperature fluctuations, they show absolutely nothing out of the ordinary.
And the doctors had no clue what was going on. We were there the whole time, packed in a small little room with the baby.
Finally, after an anxious week of waiting, Carson's mysterious spikes and dives in temperature begin to level off.
There was no evidence of infection. We elected to discharge him.
They had run every single test they could.
We felt pretty confident taking the baby home.
The Colts remain perplexed about what could have caused their newborn to take such a dramatic nosedive. But over the next few months, Carson thrives.
He seemed real healthy. He was a big boy, and he was eating normal.
He was very happy. Still didn't cry a lot.
In fact, Carson is just beginning to roll over by himself when Jeff and Dina bring him to the doctor for his 3-month immunization shots.
They checked him out, did all the vitals, took his blood pressure, and everything was normal.
But as the nurse is administering the shots, everyone in the room notices something very strange.
The nurse couldn't believe that he wasn't crying with a needle going in him.
No reaction at all. It wasn't normal. He did not cry that whole time that he was with the nurse. He wasn't responding to anything.
We had no clue what to think.
At a routine checkup, 3-month-old Carson Colt stuns his parents and doctor when he shows absolutely no reaction to a series of painful immunization shots.
The doctor was pretty amazed that he wasn't screaming or yelling with a needle going in him.
But other than his mystifying indifference to the shots, Carson seems perfectly healthy.
We really couldn't isolate any particular reason why he would act the way he did.
He went through it like a breeze. No crying or complaining or anything.
At that time, he was a thriving boy. He was growing and gaining.
The Colts take Carson home, and his parents are delighted when, just a few weeks later, their son's first baby teeth begin to come in.
He wanted to chew on everything.
We thought, okay, well, he's teething. He was doing what a normal kid does.
And it's not long before Jeff and Dina notice an unusual-looking sore on his tongue.
He started to develop this little white, it almost looked like a white canker sore. That next week or so, it started getting bigger, and it didn't look good.
The tongue got really white, and we were really concerned.
Alarmed, Jeff and Dina take Carson back to see Dr. Christopher.
He had significant amount of inflammation, and we were really quite concerned that he had some significant damage to his tongue. I thought this was just a variant of teething.
He asked, has he been crying? Has he been cranky? And I'm like, no, he's been fine, and it hasn't affected him eating. A canker sore, it hurts, and he's fine. It didn't even bother him. We were asking him, is this normal? He's like, no, I've never seen this before.
The doctor believes the lesion is simply a result of their son rubbing his tongue against his teeth. But he assures the Colts that once Carson realizes it's causing him discomfort, he'll stop doing it, and the sore will heal on its own.
We tried to keep something in his mouth almost at all times, those little baby chew toys and stuff like that.
But it seemed like, he would get bored with that. It was very frustrating, and there was nothing we could do.
Dina and Jeff do their best to put their worries behind them, confident that Carson will simply outgrow the troubling habit. But nothing could have prepared them for what their 5-month-old does next.
I was feeding him baby food one time, and I think it was squash.
Jeff said, Dina, come here. And so I ran over, and then Jeff picked up something that was on the tray.
It looked like a piece of hamburger.
It was the tip of Carson's tongue. It was probably one of the scariest things I ever saw, and his tongue was just bleeding and bleeding. We didn't know what to do. We were just shocked. He did not even react to it.
No reaction at all. No watering of the eyes or no crying or anything. Horrifying is a perfect word.
Jeff and Dina race Carson to the hospital, where Dr. Christopher is on hand to examine him.
Quite a substantial amount of his tongue was gone on the right side. I think it might have been as long as ½ an inch and probably a quarter inch across.
We asked, is it going to heal? Is it going to grow back?
We were told there's pretty much nothing we could do. The damage had been done.
He seemed to be unaffected by his loss of part of his tongue. He was manifesting also some behaviors that we thought were a little bit unusual.
Dr. Christopher is baffled by Carson's bizarre injury. All he can do is send the Colts home with an ointment that will help the remaining part of their son's tongue heal. Horrified and confused, Dina and Jeff are left groping for answers.
We were just trying to figure out why he wasn't reacting to what he just did. That was a very scary thing for us. It was just unimaginable that he never cried.
I couldn't believe it. That must have really hurt. So, why isn't he crying?
Five-month-old Carson Colt has just bitten off a part of his own tongue. But stranger still, he seems to have barely noticed it. His pediatrician, Dr. David Christopher, has no explanation for the bizarre behavior.
He didn't seem to respond to normal things that would upset someone.
A normal infant, they'd scream and yell. They'd be terrified and crying.
We thought maybe he just had a high pain tolerance.
But when Carson turns 10 months old, he starts walking, and a disturbing new pattern begins to emerge.
He would fall on the floor. Sometimes he'd hit his head, and he would just kind of get up and start to try to get up again. But he never screamed or anything like that.
One time, he'd gotten away from me, and his toe tripped. He went directly straight on the floor, hit his head, and popped up again and just took off. He never cried.
I didn't think it was normal, but it just seemed like he didn't react. I wanted an answer from somebody.
Determined to get to the bottom of Carson's puzzling case, Dr. Christopher goes back to square one.
We started looking at his history again, and we came up with some ideas that we felt needed further genetic evaluation.
Desperate to find out why their son keeps putting himself in danger, the Colts quickly set up an appointment with a genetics specialist at Children's Hospital in Seattle.
I wanted them to find out what he had and to tell me what I needed to do. In the genetics office, they looked him over, looked at his tongue, everything, and asked us questions about everything that had gone on with him.
The doctors suspect that there may be something seriously wrong with Carson's nerve fibers. But to confirm their hunch, they must first biopsy one of his nerves.
They scheduled a surgery with Carson to extract a nerve out of his leg down by the Achilles tendon.
It's a sensory nerve that if you biopsy it is one of the standard tests that's done to look for diseases of nerve fibers.
As his parents wait anxiously, 12-month-old Carson is wheeled into surgery and put under anesthesia.
We wanted to know what he had, but I also wanted it to kind of come back and say he didn't have anything. But I knew there was something there. It was just a waiting game, very stressful. I just needed to know.
And then when they were done, they brought him into the room, and we stayed with him until he came awake. We got to go home after that.
One long week later, Dr. Christopher calls with the biopsy results and a shocking diagnosis.
Based on his symptoms, Carson was diagnosed with CIPA, which is congenital insensitivity to pain and anhidrosis.
CIPA, or congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, is an extremely rare disorder in which patients don't feel pain and can't sweat. In a healthy individual, unmyelinated nerve fibers send pain and temperature information to the brain. But in patients like Carson, these nerve fibers are not fully formed. As a result, he's incapable of feeling a pinprick or the agony associated with breaking a bone. In addition, he doesn't perspire, making it impossible for him to regulate his own temperature.
In that biopsy, they were looking for the presence of fibers that send messages from the area of sensation to the brain. They're all over the body. In Carson's case, they found that he had a dramatic drop in his unmyelinated fibers that serve your pain and temperature sensation. As a youngster, you will learn that if you touch a fire, you're burned, you won't touch it again. Carson doesn't learn that because there's no pain associated with him for him. He has all the apparatus there, but he doesn't have a way of transmitting that information to his brain.
When they told us, it was a shock. He could fall down, hurt himself, and we not even know he's bleeding internally.
But Carson's insensitivity to pain is just the half of it. Of even more concern to doctors is the fact that the 12-month-old is incapable of sweating.
When you're running and your body senses that you're getting hot, you will start sweating. As a result of sweating, you cool down. That's a normal mechanism your body uses to protect your normal core temperature. And he's lost that ability. Our major concern would be succumbing to an event that would cause a high fever and seizures and subsequent death.
I was very scared. I didn't want him to have this. I was like, how is his life going to be? What's going to happen to him? I wish, he didn't have this condition.
12-month-old Carson Colt has just been diagnosed with CIPA, an extremely rare and dangerous condition that prevents him from feeling pain or maintaining a stable body temperature.
It was a relief that at least, I knew what it was, but yet it hurt because I knew that it was a condition that was genetic. It wasn't anything that can go away. Jeff and I say every day we wish it was, him or I that had this, not him.
It's now clear that the fever and temperature fluctuations Carson experienced as a newborn were classic signs of CIPA.
These kids that have this particular syndrome usually begin, as Carson did, with temperature instability as an infant. If he's in an environment that's too hot, his body cannot respond by cooling with sweating.
And Carson's inability to feel pain explains what seemed, at the time, like a mysterious indifference to injury.
Children that have been seen with CIPA also have what appears to be lack of response to noxious stimuli such as needles, such as IVs.
The teething injuries were also a direct result of CIPA, which deprived Carson of a critical warning system.
His ability to withdraw from something that's painful is diminished, and any kind of impact doesn't bother him in the least. As his tongue became abraded by his own tooth, he didn't seem to be upset by that, and even at one point he actually bit the edge of his tongue off. And that was a strong sign that he just wasn't responding to pain in an ordinary way.
I can't imagine going through life without pain, because pain's there for you to know what your boundaries are.
He was at very high risk of causing damage to his, basically to his body. He may have fractures that aren't even picked up unless you see the swelling or inflammation.
With the diagnosis in hand, the Colts can't help but wonder why it took so long to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
It's extremely rare. I've never seen a case of this before. None of my colleagues had ever seen a case before.
When he was first diagnosed, we were told that there was like 200 cases in the world.
Unfortunately, there is no cure or treatment for CIPA.
Carson is much more at risk of damaging his joints and his bones. So it's prudent for us to try to prevent that. In addition, we have to be really careful about monitoring his temperature.
We just have to watch him a lot closer.
It requires a lot of patience on their part and a lot of understanding of where Carson is coming from, why he does what he does.
Today, Carson is almost 6 years old and is slowly learning how to manage his disorder.
We've taught him that the kitchen is, a real dangerous area. When the oven's on, you stay away because that's a hot thing.
Each day presents new challenges, but the Colts are determined to keep their son safe.
When it's very cold outside, we need to make sure that he is bundled up, because he gets really cold because his body doesn't regulate the temperature. When it's hot outside, we have a cooling vest for him.
We call it a superhero vest, and it has cooling packs that we put in the refrigerator.
Dina and Jeff have done a great job with Carson. They have become their own experts on CIPA. They know quite well how to manage things.
My wife gave up her job at the hospital and decided to stay home and make sure that, he could be watched, 24/7. Throw it that way. Go get it.
Carson's doing great. He is still such a happy boy.
He's going to be 6. Each year has gotten better and better. He's been able to do more and more things just because he has more and more understanding about what can happen and how things happen. You just move forward. You try to do the best you can for your kid. I just want my kid to be happy.
While Carson Colt's symptoms set in the day his parents brought him home from the hospital, Martha Emmons was the picture of health until a sudden and terrifying disease threatened to take it all away. At 32 years old, Martha Emmons was living in Wilton, Connecticut, and was at the peak of her career as a healthcare consultant.
I had been a very healthy, energetic person my whole entire life. I was working across the United States, traveling about 80% of the time. It was a very busy time, but I was very much passionate about my career.
In January 2000, Martha takes a long-needed break from work and heads to Las Vegas with her boyfriend, Phil Bryce.
I had about 4 hours to kill and decided it would be nice to see the Hoover Dam. I was particularly struck by the visual image of the electrical wires to the dam, which were massive.
And Martha was taking pictures because it was sort of an interesting geometric shape.
So I got up very close to the wires to snap a photo. As soon as I snapped the photo, I knew something was very wrong.
Martha turned to me and said, "I feel strange."
He said the next thing he knew, I turned my head to the left and my eyes rolled up. And he said he knew when he was looking at me that I was gone.
Her head bobbed back, her eyes went up in her head, and she started to fall over, which was incredibly scary. And she began to shake.
Martha's violent convulsions draw a crowd, and Phil frantically shouts out for someone to call an ambulance.
She was shaking, foaming at the mouth, and I feared something terrible was wrong.
But after a frightening 2 minutes, the tremors suddenly stop, and Martha opens her eyes.
I was lying on my back on the concrete sidewalk, and I had no idea why I was on the ground.
15 minutes later, an ambulance arrives and rushes Martha to the nearest hospital.
What I really remember is being scared and panicked and consumed with concern for her.
At the hospital, Martha is admitted to the neurology department, where Phil carefully describes what he saw to the medical team.
I was able to tell the doctors exactly which way she looked and when her eyes rolled back, and they told me that I had described a classic grand mal seizure.
A grand mal seizure can be caused by any number of conditions, some of which are life-threatening if not corrected.
The doctors were looking for tumors in her brain, blood clots, malformations in the blood vessels in her brain, aneurysms, and I feared for the worst that something terrible was wrong.
"32-year-old Martha Emmons is enjoying a visit to the Hoover Dam when she suddenly goes into violent convulsions and is rushed to the nearest hospital. Now, doctors are running a series of tests to determine what could have triggered the terrifying seizure.
They did brain CAT scan and MRI to check for brain tumors, and they did a panel of blood tests as well. They used flashing lights to try to induce another seizure so that they could be reading what was going on with me.
But the doctors are unable to provoke another seizure, and every test they run comes up empty as well.
At the end of the 4 days, they said they couldn't find anything.
The neurologist told me that approximately 10% of the population suffers a one-time seizure during their lives.
The conclusion was, sometimes people have one seizure, we can't find anything wrong. As long as you don't have another one, it's okay.
I was placed on anti-seizure medication, and I was advised not to drive a car for 6 months.
Upon returning home, Martha does her best to carry on as usual. But any semblance of normality is soon shattered. 6 days later, while she's sitting in the kitchen, Martha experiences a disturbing sensation she's never felt before.
I thought I was going to black out, and then almost as suddenly as the feeling came over me, it went away.
Worried that the near-fainting episode could be related to the seizure, Martha immediately makes an appointment with a neurologist.
He tested my reflexes, he tested my vision, and spent about 45 minutes testing all of my neurological function.
But after performing a thorough examination, the doctor can't find a single thing wrong.
He thought that perhaps I was having some lightheadedness from not eating. He simply seemed to think that this wasn't a problem and that I should just make sure to eat every day, and especially at breakfast.
But despite eating 3 meals a day, Martha continues to experience episodes. And it isn't long before her colleagues begin to take notice.
I was having the near-fainting episodes sometimes daily or every few days. I would feel as if everything was going dark and as if I were about to pass out. And I was having a hard time focusing on the conversation I would be having with clients.
It was just kind of a pause in the conversation. She would just pause and focus on something until it passed. I made sure the conversation with the client was still going strongly, even though she appeared a little distracted.
I was always wondering, did they notice that?
She was concerned that people would think badly of her, that they would think she was acting strangely.
Martha tries her hardest to manage the puzzling symptoms and soon discovers a trick that seems to minimize the attacks.
I would lower my head because that always seemed to make the episodes go quicker.
Baffled by the episodes, but convinced that nothing serious is going on, Martha and Phil do their best to get on with their lives.
Life was so busy with travel and work that I kept thinking, I'll get to a doctor. But I didn't even really know what type of doctor to go see. In the back of my mind, I can remember, because my doctors weren't concerned, that I shouldn't be concerned.
It kind of worked into the fabric of our lives, if that makes sense.
15 months after the horrifying incident at the Hoover Dam, Phil and Martha exchange vows before a small group of family and friends.
We were married in Weston, Connecticut, by Phil's brother, who is a minister.
I was really excited to move in together and make that commitment. Life was good. When we got married, we made the decision to be open right away to having children.
6 weeks after we were married, I learned that I was pregnant. My husband and I were very happy to find out that we were able to get pregnant so quickly.
And the pregnancy has an unexpected and mysterious side effect.
During my pregnancy, the near blackouts went away entirely.
And the whole idea of them, I think, just dropped off the radar. I think we were consumed with what was coming, on our family growing and making plans for that.
The next 9 months fly by, and on February 2nd, 2002, Martha gives birth to a healthy baby boy they named David.
It was a great day when my son was born.
I was just thrilled to be a new parent. I was so busy being a mom and not thinking about the near passing out episodes at all.
When David is 3 months old, Martha goes back to work. But within just a few days, the near fainting spells return with a vengeance.
I was disappointed. I didn't have any expectation that they would ever start again.
The episodes started to get longer, deeper.
Sometimes I would have 3 or 4 episodes in a day for a few days in a row.
It's a rude awakening. But Martha can hardly contain herself when a disturbing new symptom begins to emerge.
I was having trouble recalling things such as a client's name or the name of an organization or a hospital where I was presenting.
She was definitely different. She was not nearly as sharp. She would have trouble remembering things.
It was embarrassing. I compensated by making myself cheat sheets to get through the day.
The symptoms were back, and they were kind of building, and she was just more and more concerned about them.
She couldn't think as clearly or as well or as quickly, and it started to concern her at work that she wasn't doing as good a job.
For 2 years, I dealt with this. Part of the reason being I knew when I would have the near passing out experience that within seconds it would go away. There always seemed to be an explanation for being tired or not being able to think straight.
But then one morning, when David is 2.5 years old, an incident occurs that turns Martha's entire world upside down.
I was sitting in my living room with my son, and I was eating breakfast, and he was playing. I took a bite of my cereal, and I remember standing up to go into the kitchen. And I remember a heaving sensation of my chest and my upper extremities. And that was the last thing I remember.
While home alone with her toddler son, 37-year-old Martha Bryce's worst fear comes true. She suffers a second terrifying grand mal seizure. The moment she comes out of it, her first and only thought is for her child.
I immediately looked for my son, who was in the same place where he had been when I had been eating the breakfast sitting down, and he was fine.
The doctors had told us all along, one seizure can be an isolated incident. If you have a second one, the game changes.
I knew now that I had had a second seizure, that something dramatic had changed, and I was very concerned.
Phil races home from work and drives Martha to the closest emergency room.
This was serious. What might happen if she was driving? What might happen if she was in a supermarket? What might happen in all of the different situations that she could be in with our son?
The on-call doctor immediately orders a battery of neurological tests, but like before, they reveal nothing. Perplexed, doctors admit Martha overnight in hopes that a specialist can find the critical clue they've been missing.
I was very concerned, and I knew somehow there were more answers to be found, and I was desperately looking for them at this point in time.
The next morning, cardiologist Dr. David Lomnitz goes over Martha's medical file with a fine-tooth comb and comes up with a radical new theory. He suspects that the problem isn't Martha's brain at all, but rather her heart. His next move is to hook her up to a portable monitor so they can get a better idea of what's going on inside her heart.
She needed a monitor so we could see what actually happened to her heartbeat and heart rhythm.
Which is sort of a portable heart monitor that one can wear that records the electrical activity of the heart. And she went and had one put on and went home.
And the startling results from that single night of monitoring change everything.
And the very next morning, I received a call, and Dr. Lomnitz said, "I know what's wrong with you."
But while Dr. Lomnitz suspected Martha's heart was the culprit, he can hardly believe the data he's receiving from her portable monitor.
When Martha would eat, she would have a complete stoppage of the electrical current across her heart. There would be absolutely no heartbeat for 5 to 6 seconds.
We were being told that her heart was stopping. I've always thought of that in terms of an automobile engine. What would happen if you were driving along at 60 miles an hour and you turned off the oil pump for 10 seconds in your car? And I think your engine would blow up.
Based on the results of the Holter monitor, Martha was diagnosed with swallow syncope.
Swallow syncope is a rare disorder of the vagus nerve, which controls both heart rate and the digestive muscles. When a healthy individual swallows, the vagus nerve sends signals to initiate digestion. But when Martha swallows, the part of the vagus nerve that goes to the heart misfires and shuts down the electrical system of her heart, resulting in dangerously low blood pressure, which causes her to faint and have seizures.
The vagus nerve is responsible for coordinating the muscle activity within the digestive tract. In Martha's case, unfortunately, the part of the vagus nerve that was going to her heart was also stimulated by the act of eating, and that resulted in a decrease in heart rate. After a few seconds, the blood pressure will start diminishing, and that's when people will start feeling lightheaded. If there's a lack of blood flow to the brain for a long enough period of time, without oxygen, the brain will have a seizure, and that's what happened to Martha.
Everything was falling into place. The seizures and the dizzy spells now made sense as one consistent picture.
The near passing out seemed to be explained very easily by the lack of blood flow to my head during those moments when I was eating.
It's more likely to occur within the first few bites as that vagus nerve is stimulated for the first time.
After a few moments of diminished blood flow, her body would usually self-correct.
My heart was stopping for between 5 to 10 seconds at a time, and then the heart spontaneously starts beating again.
There's probably some inhibition in the brain that sort of adjusts after the first few bites.
But Martha's trick for getting through the episodes may have actually helped to prevent even more seizures.
Patients who feel lightheaded, they have a natural instinct to put their heads between their legs. By using gravity to help the blood get to the brain, she can alleviate her symptoms.
The frequent memory lapses were also most likely an indirect result of Martha's condition.
Theoretically, maybe these small cumulative episodes of lack of blood flow to the brain lowered her cognitive function.
But Martha's still unclear as to why swallow syncope seemed to produce no symptoms whatsoever during her pregnancy.
The blood volume is increased during pregnancy. This would allow for more blood to reach her brain. And during pregnancy, women tend to have a higher resting heart rate. The combination of those two probably resulted in an alleviation of her symptoms.
We were finding some answers to what had been going on for so long. I'm very thankful for that.
Although Martha and Phil are relieved to finally have a diagnosis, they can't help but wonder why it took more than 4 years to get one.
Swallow syncope is always going to be a challenge to diagnose for any physician. In medical literature, there have been approximately 50 case reports of swallow syncope. It's so rare that physicians tend not to have come across it, and that right away makes it easy to miss.
And because the disorder is so rare, there's much about it that doctors still don't understand, including its cause.
We're not sure what triggered this condition for Martha.
There was some thought that this was a congenital disorder and that somehow the seizure, had caused it to become worse. But we weren't really sure why it happened.
Although questions remain about the origin of the condition, its potential hazard is life-threatening. Undiagnosed, swallow syncope can be devastating.
If the seizure goes on long enough without breaking, there could be permanent damage to the brain. If you have multiple episodes of seizure activities over a long enough period of time, that can also cause permanent damage to the brain.
Although there's no cure, the debilitating and dangerous seizures can be prevented by installing a pacemaker to jumpstart Martha's heart whenever it stops.
I was very nervous about the procedure.
That was a scary time when I worried that something might happen to her before we could get the pacemaker in.
On January 4th, 2005, she undergoes the surgery, and Dr. Lomnitz pronounces it a success. Today, Martha is symptom-free and back to her old self.
From the first day that I had my pacemaker implanted, I have never had another near passing out episode ever again.
I feel grateful, relieved, and extremely lucky that we are where we are.
I'm doing great today. Working on a daily basis and being with my family and feeling very good.
I've always appreciated my wife. I feel very lucky to be with her. But I think that having gone through this and having felt the risk of losing her has only made me more appreciative